Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to be reading from the Atlas Obscura. I really love what this book looks like without the dust jacket on. This is a super cool map of the world, and it says, "Let curiosity be your compass." So tonight we're still in Europe, this book. So we're going to be reading Western Europe, about Austria, Belgium, France, Germany, Greece, Cyprus, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, and Switzerland. And again, apologies if anything's mispronounced. Feel free to just correct me in the comments if you know how to correctly pronounce something. Here's the map of where we're going. So it looks like Luxembourg is our not obscure country tonight. I think everyone else is covered. It's the tiny little ones. Anyway. And no Andorra. Well, maybe we'll get Andorra in Spain, but I doubt it. Anyway, let's start off in Austria with the Republic of Kugelmugel in Vienna. The Republic of Kugelmugel is one of many micronations. These independent states, often established as art projects, social experiments, or simply for personal amusement, are not recognized by international governments. When creative urges compelled artist Edwin Lipperger and his son to build a spherical studio on their farm in 1970, they didn't realize that local laws prohibited the building of spherical structures. In an attempt to protect their creation from demolition, the Lippergers created their own Kugelmugel township, complete with self-made street signs around the building. Later, as the legal dispute escalated, Edwin Lipperger attempted to declare the structure its own federal state, the Republic of Kugelmugel, even going as far as to issue its own stamps and currency and refusing to pay taxes. The elder Lipperger was eventually sent to jail for 10 weeks in 1979. He was later pardoned by the Austrian president. In the early 1980s, Austria's culture minister suggested Kugelmugel be moved to the Vienna Prater amusement park. The Lippergers went along with the idea, having been promised access to tap water, electricity, and sewers. But these facilities were never provided, which resulted in an ongoing dispute with the city of Vienna. Edwin Lipperger died in 2015 and his son took over the presidency. The building now serves as an art gallery and is open for special exhibitions and performances. A proud micronation, it counts about 600 people as citizens, though not all citizens can fit in the space at once. That's awesome. It's a list of some other micronations. Maybe we'll get into that another day. Micronations are always fun to read about. The Esperanto Museum in Vienna. When Ludwig Lazarus Zamenhof invented the Esperanto language in the 1870s, his goal was to ease communication between people of different nationalities. Esperanto, a hybrid of Romance, Germanic, and Slavic languages, is documented and studied at this museum, along with around 500 other constructed languages, or conlings. On display is an impressive array of Esperanto objects, sodas and toothpaste containers with Esperanto labels, novels written in Esperanto, language manuals, and 19th century photographs of plant language pioneers. At its peak, Esperanto had as many as 2 million speakers. Esperanto ranks among the top 200 most spoken languages out of over 6,000 left on the planet. There are estimated to be 1,000 native Esperanto speakers who learned the language as children. Among them is the American financier George Soros. If the museum piques your interest in learning Esperanto, take note that becoming conversant in the language entitles you to join the Esperantist Passport Service, a worldwide directory of people willing to host Esperanto speakers in their homes free of charge. That's interesting. Now, one of my classes I had to take for my degree was like public speaking, like speech classes. and I did a demonstration speech on Esperanto, and as a challenge I gave myself 48 hours to learn as much Esperanto as I could, and it's a surprisingly easy language to learn, but I don't remember a word because this was over like 15 years ago. So anyway, maybe I should do a video about Esperanto. I haven't thought of that before. It was very easy to learn. So next are the trick fountains of Hellbrunn Palace in Salzburg. The Prince Archbishop Marcus Sitticus von Hohenems was quite the prankster. When building Hellbrunn Palace, his summer home, the 17th century Salzburg monarch booby-trapped its gardens with trick fountains that would spray unsuspecting guests as they toured the grounds. At each spot was a patch that remained dry. That is where the prince would stand while his visitors got soaked. This is awesome. Nearly 400 years later, the palace remains almost completely unchanged, except for the 1750 edition of the Mechanical Theatre, a water-powered diorama of a Baroque town with 200 miniature townspeople moving to organ music. That sounds like the fanciest water park in the world. Like the world's richest splash pad. Next is the World of the Ice Giants in Werfen, Salzburg. At 26 miles long, Eisreisenwelt, or World of the Ice Giants, is the largest ice cave in the world. It is filled with naturally formed sheets of dripping, curving ice, the result of melting snow from the surface flowing into the cave through cracks and crevices and solidifying when it meets the freezing temperatures. Bright magnesium lights illuminate the ice formations, making the scene even more dramatic. Moving on to Belgium, we have the Tower of Ebenezer in Bassenge-Liège. This 7-story stone tower, topped with a bull, a lion, an eagle, and a sphinx, looks medieval, but harks from a more recent time. Beginning in 1951, Robert Garcia spent over a decade building the Tower of Ebenezer by hand, as a totem to peace and the pursuit of knowledge. A devotee of the Bible, numerology, and ancient civilizations, Garcia used symbolic dimensions when designing the building. The tower's 33 meters tall, to represent Jesus' age when he died, and topped with a quartet of statues matching the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Each floor measures 12 by 12 meters, 12 being the number of Jesus' disciples. The interior walls are filled with Garcia's artwork, which depicts scenes from the apocalypse, biblical quotes, and Cretaceous dinosaurs. Climb the spiral staircase to the rooftop, and you'll emerge from under a winged lion to see panoramic views of the Belgian countryside. That sounds like a cool place. Next is the Mundanum in Monheim. The Mundanum was, to put it mildly, an ambitious undertaking. Belgian lawyer Paul Otlet and Nobel Peace Prize winner Henri Lafontaine established the project in 1910 with the aim of compiling the entirety of human knowledge on 3 by 5-inch index cards. The collection was to be the centerpiece of a world city designed by architect Le Corbusier, forming a nucleus of knowledge that would inspire the world with its libraries, museums, and universities. To address the daunting task of arranging bits of paper into a coherent compendium of world history, Otlet developed a system called Universal Decimal Classification. Over the next few decades, a growing staff created and cataloged over 12 million cards, summarizing the contents of books and periodicals. Having assembled this wealth of knowledge, Otlet began offering a fee-based research service. Queries came in by mail and telegraph from around the globe at the rate of $1,500 per year. With the paper-based system becoming cumbersome by 1934, Otlet hoped to move on to another system, a mechanical data cache accessible via a global network of what he termed electric telescopes. To his dismay, the Belgian government had little enthusiasm for the idea. With World War II looming and priorities elsewhere, the Mundanum moved to a smaller site, eventually ceasing operations after years of financial instability. The final blow came during the Nazi invasion of Belgium, when soldiers destroyed thousands of boxes filled with index cards and hung Third Reich artwork on the walls. Otlet died in 1944, his Mundanum and World City mere memories. He is now regarded as one of the forefathers of information science. His vision of a globally searchable network of interlinked documents anticipated the World Wide Web. I was going to say this sounds like Wikipedia, but handheld. The remains of the Mundanum, books, posters, planning documents, and drawers with original index cards are now on display at the Musee Mundanum in Mons. Look at this. Working hard, making little index cards filled with knowledge. Very interesting idea. Next is the Grottoes of Foley or Josh, Walloon, Brabant. Down a narrow staircase 50 feet below the small town of Volksleikhaus are nearly 50 acres of human-made caves. Carved from tough or compressed volcanic ash, they were probably dug during the Roman era or the Middle Ages. In 1886, farmers began growing mushrooms in the cold, dark grottos. The fungi grow there to this day. Prior to the mushroom era, the cave served as a refuge for bandits on the lam. Words and names chiseled into the stone, graffiti from a pre-spray can age, provide evidence of its past inhabitants. One of the most famous was Pierre Clone, an 18th century thief who robbed passing merchants and shared his spoils with the poor. Cologne was sent to jail but escaped after his wife pulled the now cliché move of sneaking him a metal file inside a cake. The legend of Cologne is celebrated at Volksleikhaus every year in early October with a festival of music, dance, and food. That's awesome. Moving on to France, this is the hollow at La Mouffe in La Mouffe, Normandy. Holloways, which appear like deep trenches dragged into the earth, are centuries-old thoroughfares worn down by the traffic of time. In Europe, most of these sunken lanes go back to Roman times or as early as the Iron Age. These deep recessed roads were naturally tunneled into the soft ground by years of footsteps, cartwheels, and animal hooves. Water flowing through the embankments like a gully further molded the paths into rounded ditches that have sunk as much as 20 feet lower than the land on either side. In some cases, trees rise up from the banks flanking the narrow path and reach toward each other to form a canopy over the road, making the holloway look like a tunnel running through the thick greenery. Isn't that fascinating? Holloways are especially common in the bocage or hedgerow landscape around Normandy, where the countryside is divided into small fields enclosed by sunken lanes and high hedges. Like many sunken roads, the trench-like holloway at La Mouffe was used as a shelter during times of war. During World War II, the La Mouffe Hollow was a defensive strong point for the German army, providing perfect cover from the advancing American troops. The limited visibility of the terrain caused the Americans to suffer heavy losses during the attack, leading U.S. soldiers to call the road in La Mouffe Death Valley Road. Interesting. Next is Oradour-sur-Glane in Oradour-sur-Glane, Limousin. There we go. Sorry. The village in Oradour-sur-Glane has stood in ruins since 1944. Among the scorched, crumbling buildings are the possessions of people who lived there over 70 years ago. Burned shells of cars, sewing machines, bed frames, the skeleton of a stroller. All sit quietly at the mercy of nothing but weather and time. On June 10th, 1944, in response to suspected resistance activity in the region, the Nazi SS stormed Oradour-sur-Glane and ordered every resident to assemble in the village square. The unit then led the men to barns and sheds, where they had set up machine guns. They locked the women and children in the church and set the building on fire. Anyone who tried to escape through a window was met with a hail of gunfire. Within hours, the Waffen-SS had murdered 642 residents of Oradour-sur-Glane. Satisfied, they left, but not before torching every structure in the village. When World War II ended, French President Charles de Gaulle declared that while a new Oradour-sur-Glane would be built next to the original, the old one must be kept in ruins as a reminder of the atrocities of war. Apart from the addition of signs, plaques, and a museum, the ghost village is untouched. A sign above the entrance reads, Souviens-toi, remember. Next is the Chap, I assume Chap, called Chap. Chap Optical Telegraph. I cheated, I looked. The Chap Optical Telegraph in Saverne, Bas-Rhin. Messages needed to travel swiftly across the country during the French Revolution, and Claude Chap's optical telegraph was just the device for the job. In 1791, Chap debuted his chain of stone towers topped with 10-foot poles and 14-foot pivoting crossbeams, and spaced as far apart as the eye could see on the Champs-Élysées. He also created a language of 9,999 words, each represented by a different position of the swinging arms, when operated by well-trained optical telegraphers. The system allowed messages to be transmitted up to 150 miles in 2 minutes. The French military saw the value of Chap's invention and built lines of his towers from Paris to Dunkirk and Strasbourg. Within a decade, a network of optical telegraph lines crisscrossed the nation. Let me bring this a little closer to you. There. When Napoleon seized power in 1799, he used the optical telegraph to dispatch the message, Paris is quiet and the good citizens are content. Very Napoleon of him. Renovated in 1998, the optical telegraph next to the Rohan Castle in Saverne functioned as part of the Strasbourg line from 1798 until 1852. It is one of several remaining relay points in the system that can still be visited today. Look at this alphabet. That's so clever, actually. Next is the rotting body of René de Chalon. There he is. Let's read about him. This is in Bar-le-Duc in Lorraine. Saint-Étienne Church, the city of Bar-le-Duc, is home to a statue of a rotting corpse. Visible musculature and skin hang in flaps over the hollow carcass. The exposed skull looks toward a raised left hand, which once held the dried heart of René de Chalon, the 16th century prince the statue depicts. The heart is believed to have gone missing sometime around the French Revolution. The life-size sculpture by Legeretta is part of the Transi Renaissance art form, stone sculptures of rotting bodies that served as a reminder of temporary flesh and eternal afterlife, like a memento mori statue. Anyway, something not so grisly. The astronomical clock of Besançon Cathedral in Besançon-Franche-Comté. Besançon Cathedral, located in the center of France's 19th century clockmaking capital, is home to a 19-foot tall clock with 300,000 pieces. It is one of the most complicated horological devices ever made. Installed in 1860, the clock shows the local time in 17 places around the world, as well as the time and height of the tides in 8 French ports, a perpetual calendar with leap year cycles, and the times of sunrise and sunset. Very cool. Next is Musée de la Chasse et de la Nature in Paris. Housed in the 17th century Hôtel de Guénégaud, the Museum of Hunting and Nature displays stuffed animals, the decorated vintage weapons that killed them, and artwork depicting the chase. One room features a large wooden cabinet dedicated to a variety of hunted animals. Concealed in the cabinet drawers are bronze casts of each animal's footprints and droppings, depictions of its natural habitat, and a poem dedicated to the creature. A room on the second floor has a ceiling entirely covered in the feathers and heads of 5 owls. In the dramatic room packed with taxidermy specimens from around the world, look out for one item that's not like the others, a wall-mounted animatronic moving albino boar head that speaks perfect French. That's weird. Next is the Petites Sommeurs in Paris. The Little Belt Railway, ringing central Paris, served urban travelers from 1862 to 1934, connecting 5 main stations owned by 5 different rail companies. The 20th century expansion of Paris and the metro eventually made the circular railway obsolete. Stretches of the track now exhibit a quirky blend of idyllic nature and gritty urban life. Plants and flowers grow between the rails against a backdrop of vivid graffiti and street art. Bridges, tunnels, and the original tracks remain mostly untouched, hidden just beyond the streets and neighborhoods of the outer arrondissement. The Petites Sommeurs is still owned by SNCF, France's national railway company, so a walk along the rails is considered trespassing. That said, an innocent bit of urban exploration is unlikely to land you in trouble. If you're strictly by the book, visit the section between the Porte d'Auteuil and the Gare de la Muette. In 2008, the area was classified as a nature trail open to pedestrians. Next is the ruins of Le Jardin d'Agronomie Tropicale in Paris. In 1907, as part of the city's colonial exposition, a set of pavilions and artificial villages went on display on the edge of the Bois de Vincennes. Each pavilion exhibited indigenous food, plants, products, and resources from colonies of the French Empire. Each village mimicked its Asian or African original. Visitors didn't even need to imagine the actual people who lived in these far-off lands. As with the plants, Paris imported them and put them on display. Throughout the summer, Indo-Chinese, Malagasy, Congolese, Sudanese, and Tuareg people lived in recreated typical environments in the park. They wore costumes, sang, and danced for curious audiences. French visitors swarmed to the garden to observe the human zoo. When cooler weather set in, the residents returned to their homes in the colonies, and the site began to decay. The land, owned by the French state, remained closed to the public until the city of Paris purchased it and reopened the site in 2007. The 5 villages are still there, but the buildings, today fenced off from visitors, have almost completely collapsed. Most have trees and other vegetation growing from within. The plants inside the greenhouses have been left to rot. A few key pieces of architecture, such as a Chinese gate, are the only hints of the garden's former role as a tribute to the glories of colonial expansion. Next is Des Gros Taxidermy in Paris. Exotic taxidermy, entomology, and natural history collections displayed in antique wooden cases and glass bell jars have made the store a destination for Parisians ever since it opened in 1881. In 2007, many of the animals were reduced to blackened fragments after a fire tore through the store. With the help of artists and collectors worldwide, the shop is back in business and today houses everything from stuffed house cats to polar bears among its 19th century decor. Though some of the more exotic animals are not for sale, You can always borrow a lion for a party. Almost everything in the store is available for rent. Check it out. This looks like a crab. That's really weird. Anyway, everything in this book's supposed to be really weird. This is the Musee Fragonard in Paris. At the Musee Fragonard, human fetuses dance a jig alongside a 10-legged sheep while a skinless horseman of the apocalypse looks on. What can I say? Founded in 1766 as a veterinary school with a private collection, the museum has rooms devoted to anatomy, physical abnormalities, articulated animal skeletons, and disease. However, by far the most striking room is the collection of écorchés, or flayed figures, created by Honoré Fragonard. Louis XV appointed Fragonard as a professor at the first veterinary school in Lyon, and it was there that he began skinning and preserving animal and later human corpses. Though he intended for his écorchés to be used as educational tools, Fragonard arranged many of his figures into theatrical poses, creating eerie posthumous narratives. The Horseman of the Apocalypse, inspired by Albrecht Dürer's painting, is the most notable example. A skinless corpse with dried, varnished muscles and unnerving glass eyes sits astride a similarly preserved horse caught mid-gallop, the thick arteries of its neck filled with red wax. Reins loop from the animal's mouth and over the rigid sinew of the rider's hands. Fragonard worked in Lyon for 6 years before his flayed figures began frightening the townspeople. He was dismissed from the institution amid accusations of insanity. The public would not see the flayed figures until the Fragonard Museum opened in 1991. Next is the Rat King in Nantes, Pays de la Loire. Hey, Rooster. Tucked away in the Natural History Museum among the beautiful taxidermy birds, sparkling minerals, and mammal skeletons is a very rare and possibly forged specimen, a rat king. Folklore holds that rat kings are formed when a group of rats get their tails inextricably entangled. Thus trapped, the creatures spend the rest of their lives intertwined and unable to move, relying on other rats to bring them food. The Nantes Rat King specimen, found in 1986, consists of 9 conjoined rodents preserved in alcohol. It is one of only a handful of cases ever found, though scientific consensus considers its natural occurrence unlikely. Next, as you can see here, is Le Palais Idéal in Haute-Rive, Rhône-Alpes. It all began with a postman and a pebble. Walking on his usual mail delivery route in 1879, Ferdinand Cheval tripped on a rock, took note of its peculiar shape, and had a sudden vision of a grand palace made of irregular stones. For the next 33 years, he worked diligently to transfer the palace from his imagination into reality, collecting rocks in a wheelbarrow while delivering letters. An oil lamp guided his hands as he worked on the palace alone at night. Not once did he ask for or receive help. Cheval had little formal education and no architectural experience. His stone, cement, and wire creation was inspired by different styles and eras, incorporating Chinese, Algerian, and Northern European designs. The final castle, the ideal palace, is a magnificent tangle of grottos, flying buttresses, and animal statues. A shrine holds the wooden wheelbarrow that carried the rocks. When French authorities denied Cheval's wish to be buried within his palace, he was undeterred. Over the next 8 years, the 80-year-old self-made architect built his own magnificent vault in the local cemetery, in a style closely resembling that of Le Palais Idéal. He died a year after its completion. Can you believe that? All made by one guy. That's so cool. Next is the world's largest solar furnace in Odilo, Languedoc, Roussillon. A solar furnace uses a large concave surface of mirrors to reflect sunlight onto a focal point the size of a cooking pot. The temperature at this point may reach above 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit, enough to generate electricity, melt metal, or produce hydrogen fuel. The world's largest solar furnace is located on Fragonard Vla, a commune in the sunny Pyrenees Mountains on the French-Spanish border. Operational since 1970, it uses a field of 10,000 ground-mounted mirrors to bounce the sun's rays into a large concave mirror that shows a distorted upside-down reflection of the countryside. Tours of the site include workshops and demonstrations on renewable energy and the solar system. I get it now. That's Fragonard and then Odeo Via because it's French and Spanish. I get it now. Anyway, moving on to Germany. Here's the Space Travel Museum in Feucht, Bavaria. Dedicated to space technology, the Hermann Oberth Space Travel Museum celebrates the zeal and inventiveness of its namesake, one of the forgotten founding fathers of rocketry and modern astronautics. Born in 1894, Hermann Oberth was interested in astronomy from a young age. After reading Jules Verne's From the Earth to the Moon at 11, Oberth began sketching designs for rockets. By the time he was 14, Oberth designed plans for a recoil rocket that could propel itself through space by expelling exhaust gases from its base. This was quite the achievement for an adolescent, considering rockets meant for manned spaceflight would not exist for another 50 years. After studying physics, aerodynamics, and medicine at universities in Munich, Heidelberg, and Göttingen, Oberth published a 429-page tome in 1929 entitled The Rocket into Interplanetary Space. The book had a global impact. It would have been a banner year for the newly esteemed scientist if not for the fact that he lost vision in his left eye while building a flying rocket model for Fritz Lang's sci-fi film Women in the Moon. Exhibits inside the museum include a Cirrus rocket and a Cumulus rocket developed in the 1960s and launched outside of Cuxhaven, Germany. A Swiss Zenit sounding rocket is also on display. Next is the Gallery of Beauties in Munich, Bavaria. Though married at 24, 19th century Bavarian King Ludwig I kept 36 beautiful young women in his palace. Whenever he became enamored with a female acquaintance's good looks, a portrait of her placid face would soon appear in the Schönheitsgalerie, his gallery of beauties, a room in the south pavilion of Nymphenburg Palace, literally Nymph Castle. The women are captured in their late teenage years or early 20s, milk-skinned and serene. The standout work of the collection is Helene Sedlmayr, a doe-eyed, dark-haired shoemaker's daughter who gave toys to Ludwig's children. Her beauty was particularly appreciated by the king's valet, Hermes Miller, with whom she went on to bear 10 children. Next is the jeweled skeleton of Saint Munditia. Munditia? Let's go for Munditia. In Munich, Bavaria. St. Peter's Church, or Alter Peter as locals call it, is Munich's oldest church, dating from before the city's founding in 1158. A quarter of the way down the aisle is a glass coffin bearing the skeleton of St. Munditia, who met her end courtesy of a hatchet beheading in 310 CE. Once kept hidden in a wooden box, she was carefully adorned and put on display in 1883. Glass eyes stare out from the sockets of her sepia-stained skull. Jewels conceal her rotted teeth, and her skeleton, covered in golden gemstones, has been reunited with her skull. Next is Icebock Vla in Munich, Bavaria. If you're riding the Munich subway in the dead of winter and see someone carrying a surfboard, chances are they're heading for the Icebock, an artificial stream that runs through Munich's biggest park, the English Gardens. A 1.5-foot stationary wave at the spot beneath the bridge was once an occasional sight, until local surfers funneled it into a more forceful, permanent swell, by installing planks of wood on the sides of the river. Now the site attracts wave riders who brave the cold water, 39 degrees Fahrenheit in winter, 60 degrees Fahrenheit in summer, to surf the stream in front of a crowd of onlookers. So popular is the site that queues of surfers form on both sides of the narrow river. Those who pioneered the permanent wave have become disgruntled by the mass influx of newcomers, but their real ire is reserved for beginner surfers who lack the skills to conquer the wave. Typical surfers, it's like the two things that annoy them the most. Crowds and beginners who don't know what they're doing. Next is the externstina in Hornbad Meinberg, North Rhine-Westphalia. The externstina, translated variously as stones of the ridge or the star stones, are a collection of limestone formations that jut up from the ground in a forest south of Detmold. There is scant evidence of the site's historical significance, but among the few known facts is that Christian monks carved stairs and reliefs into the stones during the late 8th century. The externstina were a blank slate for Heinrich Himmler and his Third Reich comrades. Himmler was the head of the Nazis' occult division. Let me say this. Nernerb. Anyway, a pseudo-scientific think tank devoted to finding, or in many cases fabricating, an honorable and far-reaching Germanic history. The society identified the externstina as an important location of ancient Teutonic activity. Today the site remains a pilgrimage spot for both neo-pagans and neo-Nazis. Visit on the summer solstice or on the celebration of Walpurgisnacht, and you will encounter a motley crew of pagans, hippies, mystics, and skinheads, each group celebrating for different reasons. Next is the 1,000-Year Rose in Hildesheim, Lower Saxony. The wild shrub that sprawls up a wall of Hildesheim Cathedral is believed to be the oldest living rose bush in the world. Local tradition says that in 815, Louis the Pious, king of the Franks, was on a hunting trip in Hildesheim and stopped to observe Mass. After departing the area, he realized he had left behind a relic of the Blessed Virgin Mary. When he returned to retrieve it, he discovered the relic caught in a dog rose bush that refused to let it go. Taking this as a sign of the divine, Louis had a chapel built around the rose bush. In the 11th century, the chapel was expanded into what became Hildesheim Cathedral. Even if the rose bush isn't as old as its legend, it has certainly proven its resilience. In March 1945, Allied bombs leveled the cathedral. Somehow, out of the burning rubble, the rose bush flourished once more. It now covers a courtyard facing outer wall of the cathedral, which was rebuilt between 1950 and 1960. Next is the Kaspar Hauser Monument in Ansbach, Bavaria. On a quiet street in the small city of Ansbach stand two statues depicting the same person, one as a boy and the other as a young man. They are both the mysterious Kaspar Hauser. The odd, unresolved story of Kaspar Hauser began on a May afternoon in 1828, when a stumbling, squinting teenage boy appeared on the streets of Nuremberg. The 4-foot 9-inch Hauser had pale, soft skin, spoke few words, and seemed ill at ease among people. He carried 2 letters. The first, dated 1828, detailed the hardships that forced the author, apparently the boy's caretaker, to give him up. It ended with an ultimatum: take care of Kaspar, or if you cannot, kill him. The second letter, dated 1812, was written by Kaspar's mother. She stated that she could not afford to raise him and wished for him to join the 6th Cavalry Regiment at Nuremberg when he turned 17. A close examination of the letters revealed they were likely written by the same person in a single session. The mystery deepened when Kaspar began talking. He claimed he spent his childhood locked in a small, dark cell, never seeing another person and waking up each day to a meal of bread and water. His only human contact, he said, was with a man who arrived shortly before his release and taught him to say the phrase, "I want to be a cavalryman like my father." Friedrich Daumer, a professor, took Caspar into his home and taught him to speak German, ride horses, and draw. The boy began to adapt to his environment, but his highly attuned senses and inexplicable sensitivity to magnets and metal caused him anguish. One day in October 1829, Caspar appeared with a bleeding wound on his forehead, claiming he had been attacked by a hooded man while using the bathroom. The man was never found, and the wound may have been self-inflicted. A few months later, a gunshot rang out from Caspar's room. Again he was discovered with a wound to the head, this time declaring he had knocked a pistol to the ground where it accidentally went off. Caspar's strange life ended in 1833 when he sustained a fatal stab to the chest at the Palace Gardens in Ansbach. He said a man had lured him there and lunged at him. He even provided a note from the assailant. That's really bizarre. Let's go to the castle of Vettelsburg in Vettelsburg, North Rhine-Westphalia. More Heinrich Himmler. SS leader Heinrich Himmler had grand, horrifying plans for the triangular Renaissance castle in Vettelsburg. In 1934, undeterred by its dilapidated state, he signed a 100-year lease on the property. His mission was to turn the castle into an SS training center where young Aryan minds could study Nazi-skewed versions of history, archaeology, astronomy, and art. The SS redesigned the castle, incorporating swastikas and occult symbols, and used slave laborers from the nearby Niederhagen and Sachsenhausen concentration camps to bring the plans to life. Nazi-approved artwork and historical objects decorated the halls. The focal point of the redesign was a circular chamber known as the crypt, which featured an eternal flame at the center of the room surrounded by 12 seats, an allusion to the Knights of the Round Table. On the ceiling was a large swastika. As construction continued, Himmler expanded his vision for the town of Vettelsburg. From 1941, he began to view it as the future center of the New World Order, with the castle anchoring a village populated exclusively by SS leaders. But in spite of all the plans, SS training never took place at Vettelsburg. The SS did conduct meetings there, and it functioned as a venue for SS officer marriage consecrations, although prospective spouses had to provide genealogical documentation proving their Aryan heritage before the ceremony could take place. After Germany's 1943 defeat at Stalingrad, regarded as the beginnings of the end for the Nazis, construction at Vettelsburg halted. On March 30th, 1945, a month before Hitler's death, Himmler ordered SS Major Heinz Mouffe to destroy the castle. The U.S. 3rd Infantry Division arrived the next day to discover the castle interior in ashes. Only the outside walls remained. Today, Vettelsburg is one of Germany's largest youth hostels, offering 204 bed accommodations and team-building programs for school children. A museum at the entrance presents the history of the SS and pays tribute to its victims. And next we're going to see the Impaled Stork at Rostock in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. Until the 19th century, the annual disappearance of white storks each fall puzzled European birdwatchers. Aristotle thought the storks went into hibernation with the other disappearing avian species, perhaps at the bottom of the sea. Other hypotheses argued that the disappearing birds flew to the moon to escape the cold weather. In 1822, a stunning piece of evidence proved key to solving the mystery of the disappearing birds. A white stork shot on the Bothmer estate near Mecklenburg was discovered with a 2.5-foot-long Central African spear embedded in its neck. Remarkably, the stork had flown all the way from its equatorial wintering grounds in this impaled state. The stork now sits alongside the 60,000 other specimens of water animals, mollusks, birds, and insects, the University of Rostock's zoological collection. Next is the Toeflsberg Spy Station in Berlin. Atop a mountain in Grunewald Forest, about 6 miles west of central Berlin, are two sphere-topped cylindrical towers wrapped in shredded white canvas. During the Cold War, these buildings were part of Field Station Berlin, an NSA listening post where spies could tune into Soviet radio frequencies. It's so weird looking. The spy station was constructed on top of a Nazi military college complex built in 1937, intended to be part of Hitler's world capital, Germania, a revitalized National Socialist version of Berlin. The college was abandoned at the start of World War II. Post-war, the rubble of bombed-out Berlin was trucked to Grunewald and dumped on top of the college in a pile that topped 37 stories and became known as Teufelsberg, German for Devil's Mountain. In 1963, the NSA station began operating in newly constructed buildings at the top of Teufelsberg. Its satellite antenna positioned in prime hilltop spots concealed by the canvas-covered spheres. The station became a key surveillance post for American and British intelligence officers studying the goings-on in East Germany. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, the station was abandoned. In 1996, the site was sold to property developers Hartmut Krul and Hanfried Schutte, who envisioned a bold transformation involving luxury apartments, a hotel, and a restaurant. Those plans, however, have not materialized. The former NSA station is still at Teufelsberg and has attracted artists looking to make their mark on its abandoned walls and eventually establish an official residency. Right, we're heading on to Greece. The Marco Polo Snake Festival in Cephalonia, Marco Polo. For Orthodox Christians, August 15th commemorates the Assumption of the Virgin Mary into heaven. At the small hamlet of Marco Polo on the island of Cephalonia, villagers celebrate by collecting snakes in bags and bringing them to the church, where they slither over feet, flick their tongues at a portrait of Mary and Jesus, and are placed on children's heads for good luck. The combination of Jesus' mother and snakes, a biblical symbol for evil and corruption, may seem incongruous, but the basis for the tradition is a miracle said to have taken place on the island in 1705. That year, the story goes, nuns in the village convent escaped a gang of attacking pirates when the Virgin answered their prayers to be transformed into snakes. The serpents, a small non-threatening species known as the European cat snake, now make an annual appearance at the Church of Virgin Mary, where the faithful and the curious gather to handle them. According to locals, the snakes only emerge in the days leading up to the festival and cannot be found on the island during the rest of the year. Next is the Antikythera Mechanism in Athens, which is like the weirdest thing. Let me tell you about it. This corroded lump of bronze with a dial on top doesn't look like much, but its discovery forced a complete reevaluation of ancient Greek engineering. The Antikythera Mechanism was part of a shipwreck that lay in the Mediterranean for over 2,000 years. In 1900, sponge divers happened upon the fragmented vessel and hauled the mechanism from the depths. It sat in a museum for 50 years before historians took a serious look at it. They discovered a device of unprecedented complexity. The machine was built between 150 and 100 BCE, and with over 30 gears hidden behind its dials, it is easily the most advanced technological artifact of the pre-Common Era. Regarded as the first known analog computer, the mechanism can make precise calculations based on astronomical and mathematical principles developed by the ancient Greeks. Although its builder's identity and its purpose on the ship remain unknown, after a century, scientists are beginning to understand how the device worked. To use the instrument, you would simply enter a date using a crank, and when the gears stopped spinning, a wealth of information would appear at your fingertips. The positions of the sun, moon, planets, and stars, the lunar phase, the dates of upcoming solar eclipses, the speed of the moon through the sky, and even the dates of the ancient Olympic Games. The mechanism's calendar dial could compensate for the extra quarter day in the astronomical year by turning the scale back one day every 4 years. Impressive given that the Julian calendar, which was the first in the region to include leap years, was not introduced until decades after the instrument was built. Today, the Antikythera Mechanism is housed in the bronze collection of the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. The device continues to reveal its secrets to the researchers of the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project, an international effort supported by various universities and technology companies. Next is the Easter Rocket War in Frontados, Chios. Since the 19th century, a pair of rival parishes on the Greek island of Chios have celebrated Easter not with bunnies or eggs, but by launching thousands of flaming projectiles at each other's churches while congregants observe Mass inside. When the sun sets on the eve of Orthodox Easter Sunday, members of the Angios Markos and Panagia Eritani churches, wearing bandanas over their faces to filter out the sulfur-scented smoke, launch the cigar-sized rockets from ramps. They blaze across the sky in quick succession, leaving trails of vapor and providing a cacophonous accompaniment to the solemn Easter services taking place within the churches. Wire mesh protects the windows from damage. The origin of this orthodox yet unorthodox tradition is uncertain, but likely began as an act of defiance against Ottoman occupiers during the 19th century. There are two versions of the story. In the first, the islanders launched rockets after the Turks confiscated their cannons. In the second, locals fired rockets at each other's churches to keep the Turks away during Easter services. The aim of the proceedings is to hit the oppressing church's bell tower, but this goal is largely irrelevant given the general chaos of the evening. Neither side has declared the victor of the war, and an annual rematch is assured. Moving on to the Mount Athos Monastery in Mount Athos. On a mist-shrouded peninsula east of Thessaloniki is a place where time is stalled and the rules of the modern world do not apply. Mount Athos, known to Greeks as the Holy Mountain, is the home of Eastern Orthodox monasticism. Self-governed and running on Byzantine time, in which the day begins at sunset, Mount Athos accommodates 1,500 monks within its monasteries, most of which were built during the 10th century. The monks' sole purpose in life is to become closer to God. The monks believe that achieving complete oneness with Jesus Christ is only possible after death, but preparations are made throughout life. Every waking hour is spent praying or reflecting in silence. Monks, who wear long black robes to signify their death from the surrounding world, live in one of 20 communes, or, for those who prefer greater solitude, in cloisters or cells. There are 8 hours of church services every day, beginning at 3 a.m. When not at church, monks pray individually, their lips moving silently under their long beards. Women are forbidden from visiting or living on Mount Athos in accordance with the belief that a female presence would alter the social dynamics and impede the monks' journey towards spiritual enlightenment. The absence of women, according to the monks, also makes it easier to live a life of celibacy. Finally, there is the consideration for the Virgin Mary. According to Athonite tradition, Mary was blown off course during her journey to Cyprus and landed on Mount Athos, where she converted its pagan tribes to Christianity. Banning women from the peninsula allows the Virgin to be revered as the only female influence. Male visitors to Mount Athos are permitted to attend church services, dine with the monks, and stay overnight in one of the monasteries. A calm, pious demeanor is expected, as most travelers are Orthodox pilgrims seeking spiritual refuge and community.